All right, so let's talk about applying CSS properties more efficiently. Okay, so this is exercise 6, and you can see it has like a heading and there's a couple of paragraphs here. I have an unordered list, and I have this is like a sidebar and some list items here. And let's just hypothetically say that I wanted to make all of the text red. Now, we've learned some additional ways of speeding up the process. So instead of having to do something like this, where I do everything and list it out, I could just, use commas, right? I could do what's called a multiple selector, where it's like H1, H2, H3, H4. But even that is still really annoying because it's like I'd have to list every possible, tag that could be used. If all of my text is supposed to be red, I have to list any tag that could possibly be text, okay? And there's actually an easier way to do this, okay? So we've talked about how your web page is what we refer to as the document object model. And what essentially that just means is that there are tags within other HTML tags. So for instance, here in my page here, inside of my inside of the body tag, it has 3 children, the H1, the section tag, and the A side. So there's the body tag, the H1, the section, and the A side. Okay. And then inside of the section tag, there's additional tags inside of that. There is an H2 and then a div. Oops. Inside of that div are a couple of paragraphs. Okay, so it starts, we're showing the relationship between all of these. So this is the parent, this is the child. This is the parent to this. This is the child of this. Okay, and this is what we call the document object model, which is the idea that there are HTML tags within other HTML tags. They're sort of nested together like a Russian nesting doll. Okay, now to save a little bit of time, I've actually drawn all of this out. So here is exercise 5. Here's the document object model for that particular page. So, starting with the very beginning, you have the HTML tag. It divides into the head and the body. The title is nested inside of the head. It's a child. This has this. This has its own children. Inside of the sidebar, it has a list. The list has its own children, which are list items, so on and so on. So what we could do is apply what's called cascading. Now remember, this is called cascading style sheets, right? So what do we mean by cascading? What is cascading in real life? Well, typically when we talk about cascading, people talk about water, usually. So cascading water is when water sort of trickles down. So that like the water starts here, and it trickles to there, and then it goes to there, and it trickles down to the next one. Or something like this, where it goes from there, to there, to there, to there, okay? So how does this relate to CSS? Well, the idea is this. If we take a look at this, I can if I apply something to the parent, it'll actually pass down the property to its children. Okay, so this is referred to as CSS inheritance. Think about inheritance in real life, like, you inherit your eye color, your hair color from your parents. So in the same way, these child tags can inherit a style from its parent. So for instance, instead of having to stylize every single one of these, because all of these are inside of the A-side tag, which is the sidebar, if I went to here and I said A-side color red, and let's set a font to it as well, let's set it to Courier, and I preview this, it's going to affect everything inside of that A-side. What happened is it started here and it passed it down. Okay. In fact, you can even see it if I was to right-click and go inside and I click on the H2 and I go to my styles, it will say inherited from A-side. So in other words, the A-side got the color and it passed it down to the H2 that's inside of the A-side. That's the child of the A-side. Same thing with the list. The list would say, if I go to this list item here, it would say inherited from A-side. And it shows what was exactly inherited, which in this case is the color and the font. Let's say I wanted to set a font for the entire page. Okay, so I want the same font that's going to be for the entire page. Well, if you think about it, the body tag really represents the entire page, right? So if I apply something to the body, it's going to sort of drip down to everything else that's in my document. So I'm going to go to body, and I'm actually going to set the font here. So what's happening is it's applying it to the body, and it's going to pass it down to its children, who pass it down to its children, who pass it down to its children, and the final result is going to be the whole page turns into Courier. Okay. Not every single property is passed down. Some are and some are not. Okay. That of course begs the question, all right, well, how are you supposed to know which ones are and which ones are not? And usually 99% of the time the answer is you need a reference. Let's go to W3 Schools, and I'm going to go to where it says Learn CSS. I'm going to scroll down here on the left side to CSS Reference. And when I do that, you can see these are every single CSS property. So for instance, if I click on, say, color, first of all, it's going to give an example of the CSS property in use. It's going to say what it does, and then under here it's going to say inherited. Yes. So what this means is that this would be passed down to its children if this has got applied to something. Let's look at background image though. If I click on background image, once again it shows a code example, it explains what it does. Inherited, no. This means if you apply a background image to, say, the body, it doesn't defaultly pass it down to all of its children. Okay, so, you can check to see whether something is inherited or not. Keep in mind that just because something is inherited doesn't mean that it's going to be that way. Okay, so the way I kind of like to think about it, so remember that I said inheritance is kind of like, you get your hair color or your eye color from your parents, right? But even though you may get your hair color or eye color from your parents, you can still at any time overwrite that. So what does that mean? Well, for instance, you get your hair color from your parents, but you can always dye your hair a different color. You can dye your hair green or blue or whatever you want, or you could wear contacts that make your eye color different. So even though everything in my page here is getting turned into Courier, let's say that somewhere down the line, one of the children of the page here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say H2 font family, and let's use Arial Black. I'll go back and I'm going to preview this. So you can see that for my headings 2, it's overwritten the inheritance because it's being applied directly to it. So it was inheriting the courier from its parent, but then I wrote something that directly affected it, and so it got overwritten. So here you can see it says inherited from body, and it was courier, but because I wrote this directly to it, that overwrites it. Okay, this is something we call specificity. If something is more specific to a tag, it overwrites anything that is inherited from it, or anything that comes from the default, like the user agent or anything like that. Okay, I'm going to do one more example. Let's go to exercise 6. Once again, I've already drawn out the document object model, make the page easier to see. This is what my page looks like. So it starts with the HTML, breaks down the head and body. The body has a header, section, and footer. Child, inside of that, there's an H1, a nav tag with hyperlinks. The section has articles in it with paragraphs and headings, and the footer has a footer nav in it. Okay. So once again, let's say that I wanted to set a base text for my page. I might go and say body, and let's set a base font. So I'm going to set it to Courier. Let's set a base size. So maybe I'm going to set it to 10 points with a line height of 14. And let's set a color. Maybe I'm going to set it to a sort of darkish gray color, kind of like here. All right. So because this is going to apply to the body, it's going to apply to everything below it, because that's what cascading does. It drips down and affects everything. So here's my page. Now let's hypothetically say, though, that I want my the BG section to have red text. So let's go and look at that area. So you can see I have an ID, I have an article with an ID on it called BGs. So what I can say here is that BGs, let's set the text color to red. Now what's going to happen is, because this, this is the article, because this is more specific than this comes further down the line, this is going to overwrite the inheritance. Okay, so these guys are going to inherit what happens from the parent, because this is closer. It's kind of like I said, it's like you can always, dye your hair or use, colored contacts to change your eye color at any point. So because I'm applying it to the article and that's closer, when I go back and I preview this, it's just going to make this section red, but not the rest of it. Okay. Or maybe I want everything that's inside of the nav, the header section, I want to make that a different color. So I'd say header, color, maybe I'm going to make it a light gray. Let's do it. Let's do like, I don't know, green. So if I do that, everything inside, or almost everything, is turning green. If you're wondering why this doesn't affect, I'm going to give you, I didn't mean to do this, but I'm going to show it to you now. Hyperlinks are interesting in that hyperlinks have a default color. So unless you apply CSS directly to a hyperlink, inheritance will never work on it, because it has it, the specificity says that this is closer because it's applied directly to it. So even though I applied it to the nav tag, it did inherit it, but this default color here is actually overriding it. So this was maybe not the best example, so maybe instead of applying it to the header, I'm just going to apply it to the footer. Okay, I'm actually running into the same problem because the footer had a bunch of hyperlinks in it. So, you know, I could also solve it by using footer. I could use a compound, footer A, you know, something like this would also solve that problem. But anywho, I can't win today, huh? Let's do Beatles. So this is closer to what I was trying to show you, where it's like everything in this section now is green because it's in, I've set it to the article, which is the parent, and it's passing it down to all of its children. Okay, so that's inheritance. You're going to be using CSS Inheritance, or you should use it to your advantage, so that you don't have to waste your time, you know, applying a million selectors when you could just sort of set a default, you know, style to the body, and then if you ever need to go back and change things, you can always be more specific later on, using compounds or using classes or something like that. Okay.